I want to share with you guys an interesting lesson corresponding to Sukkot. So one of my Rebbeim, Rabbi Warch Shlita, he is an mumcha, an expert in the laws of the Arba Minim, the four species that we take on Sukkot. And so every Motzi Yom Kippur, I will usually go to the store that he works at, where he sells lulavim and esrogim, buy a lulav and esrog, and have them checked by him to make sure that they're halachically acceptable. And one year when I was in the store, there was a man there who kept grabbing esrogim, and he was like very nervous, and he was like budging people, and he was even like grabbing esrogim out of other people's hands. Now, the idea of checking many esrogim is not something that's unusual, because esrogim have many complicated halachas. But this man was grabbing every single esrogim and he was smelling them, which is a little odd. And he finally said, "Oh, this one smells the best. I have to get it." And he budged everybody, went and paid for his esrog, and walked out of there. And Rabbi Warch had a very interesting look on his face. So I'm going to explain to you what he told me about this seeming incidents that we saw, and explained to me and gave me a very beautiful explanation. I'm going to give you some background information so that you can understand the profundity of what I learned that day. So you see, the rabbis say things that to many people seem to be childish. And there might be some truth even in those childish statements on the childish level. However, there's also, as we know, that there's many facets of the Torah, and Torah is something that has unbelievable depth. There's also tremendous depth behind those statements. One of the famous statements that just comes to my mind that makes people laugh is the statement that we know that on Friday night, when we make Kiddush for Shabbos, we have the cup of wine and we say Kiddush over it, B'rei Pri Hagafen, and then we have our bread that's usually covered with something over it, and then once we make the Kiddush, we remove the covering, and then we make the blessing on the bread, and Hamosi Lechem Min Haaretz. But why do we have to have a covering on the challah? So we know that normally we make the blessing on bread before wine. Bread is considered to be more important than wine. So if it was a regular weekday and you wanted to have bread and wine, you'd first make a blessing on the bread and then you make the blessing on the wine. However, because we have to make Kiddush on Shabbos, the blessing on the wine has to come before the bread. So we have to cover the bread because the bread might get offended. The bread is like, usually I come first. So we have to hide from the bread that it's not getting the first blessing and that the wine is getting the first blessing, so that the bread's feelings are not upset. Now, to many people, that comes off as a childish, ridiculous statement. Our rabbis do say it. And we know our rabbis are not childish. Now, there is some truth contained in the simple meaning of that statement, which we're not going to go into right now. But you can't just think that the profundity of that statement ends right there. Our rabbis were not fools. So let's take one of these seemingly childish teachings that we know by Sukkot and try to examine it. So one of them is that we have our four species that we take for the lulav, the esrog, the hadassim, the aravos, and the esrog, or etrog, the citron fruit. Our rabbis tell us correspond to the son of the Passover Seder, because we have four sons for the Passover Seder. We have four species of that we take on Sukkot, and we know that there's a special connection, which I'm not going to get into right now, between Sukkot and between Pesach, and the esrog corresponds to the son that is the perfect son, because the esrog has a good smell, and it also has a good taste. The good taste represents internal, because taste is something that's like on the inside, like the good son is he's a chacham, he's smart. Okay, so that is represented by the good taste of the esrog, which is something internal. But the good son also does good deeds. He does mitzvos, right? And that is represented by the good smell of the esrog. Now, usually when people hear this teaching, they just kind of nod their head and like, okay, that's kind of cute, but it's of no real intellectual substance. It's just, this is similar to that. Okay, but it doesn't really mean anything, doesn't really affect my life, and let's move on to something more academically stimulating. So now with that background information in mind, we can really start to build somewhere. So first of all, you should know that in Jewish law, there is no requirement that your esrog has to smell good. And looking for an esrog that smells good, just because it smells good, in the words of Rabbi Warch, is defeating the point of why Hashem created esrogs to smell good in the first place. So now we have to address this point. Why did Hashem create the esrog with a good smell? You see, what's supposed to happen is that when you take your esrog and your four species to do the mitzvah, because the mitzvah is you bind them together, you hold them in your hand, and then you pick it up, and then we shake it and stuff. So while you're doing that, well, I assume since you're a human being, you might have to breathe. And coincidentally, that breath might come through your nose. And while you're doing the mitzvah and you're thinking about the mitzvah, it just happens to be that when you shake them, maybe a smell emanates. Maybe it's the smell of that esrog, and you happen to get a whiff of your esrog. And here's what's supposed to go through your mind. You see, a Jew has to be somebody mindful. A Jew's not just supposed to be like, oh, well, hey, my esrog happened to smell nice. I wasn't trying to smell my esrog. I just, shook it and it came into my nose and, well, it smells nice and move on. But that's not what a Jew's supposed to do. A Yid always has to think and be mindful. You see, how many times do you wake up and have a stuffy nose and you can't even smell anything? Or maybe you got COVID-19 and you can't smell today. Or maybe the esrog that you have just happened to lost its smell. Or maybe, your esrog didn't lose your smell and its smell and your nose is working fine and it just happened to be today you just didn't smell it for whatever reason. But Hashem arranged it that today that when you were doing the mitzvah, you weren't even trying to smell your esrog, but when you were doing the mitzvah, a deed, the smell of the esrog hit you. That you smelled it today by coincidence and you didn't arrange it, there's supposed to be a message there. A Yid is supposed to always say in life, why am I seeing this? Like if Chas v'Shalom a Yid sees a car crash, you don't just say, well, why did the car crash happen? And, this guy was drunk or whatever. You have to say to yourself, why did I see that? What's Hashem's message that he's trying to send me that I saw this today? You're supposed to do that with everything in life. Because it isn't a given that every time you go to shake the lulav of an esrog, the esrog smell will hit you. It's not a given that every time that happens. So why today did it happen and why today am I smelling it? It is to make you do an accounting of yourself at that exact moment. That's why that smell hit you. We said the smell of the esrog represents the deeds of a person, meaning the deeds are something that emanate from a person and they're sweet smelling, right? So if while literally performing a deed, aka mitzvah, the taking of the lulav and esrog, you don't arrange it this way, you happen to smell your esrog, you're supposed to sit and reflect at that exact moment and say, am I like this esrog? Do my deeds emanate a good smell, so to speak? You're supposed to do a calculation in your head. The esrog represents good smelling deeds. Hashem arranged it right now that I would happen to smell the esrog. I didn't do it on purpose. He arranged it right now. Is he trying to send me a message about my deeds? I should do an accounting right now. Are my deeds as sweet smelling as this esrog? The way I behave to people in life. You see, budging into people, okay? Cutting people in line. Talking over people to get a good smelling esrog literally defeats the point of why Hashem created an esrog to smell good in the first place. He created it to smell good because when you're doing the mitzvah literal deed, maybe that smell of that esrog will happen to hit you in your nose, and you're going to think to yourself, why does this esrog smell so good? Oh, it smells good because it represents good deeds. Am I doing good deeds? Am I like this esrog? Hashem did not create the esrog for its own good smelling sake. It doesn't smell good because Hashem wanted to do something nice to the esrog. He created it so that He created it for you to do reflection. Do not miss the forest for the trees. And this is true about everything in life. You have to ask yourself, why is this here? What message is trying to be sent to me? So perhaps when we smell our esrogim by chance, this sukkos, we will take these ideas and we will do an examination of ourselves. Meaning, remember, the esrog is something that people literally take with a microscope just to see little dots and imperfections and stuff like that, which is nice. I'm not discounting that. But you have to also do that to yourself. Like the esrog corresponds to a person's heart. So let us this sukkos merit to be mindful Yidden. All right, have a good Yantif.